Warning, the podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, Forensics with Laura Sudkamp and Marci Adkins, Part 2 of 3.
Is that right? You just get various types of things to examine at your lab, correct?
Yes. I have a window that overlooks the front parking lot. And there have been times, there was one time one of the agencies pulled up and next thing I know, there's a bed frame coming through the parking lot. I met them at the front door like, whoa, we don't have room to store that. And they're like, we think that's blood. And I'm like, okay, get a swab. I didn't need to bring in the bed. Education moment right there for them. But it is, we did get a little bit of everything. I actually tell you the truth. We moved into a house in 1995 and I had a 16-month-old and a 10-month-old. No, 20, I don't know. 6-month-old and a 2-year-old. Let's go that way. And there was a baseball bat in the basement, just sitting in a room down there. I went and got my husband and said, no, you're going to have to get that out of the house. I've seen too many of them used the wrong way. Can you it's weird things like that just hit you the wrong way. And, just a bat left behind sitting in a room. I'm like, no, we're done.
Did you test it?
Nope.
The first thing
Throw it in the garbage. Get rid of it.
I'm seeing Laura shake up a bottle of luminol and turning out the lights.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to ask how, and I often wonder, when you get these things like your bloody knife or your bloody bat with hair on it or whatever may be on it, is there that moment that you all sit there and just see in your head what likely happened with this instrument before you examine it?
It's a fortunate position that we're in where we have a very detached view of the crime. So I feel like sometimes we forget the violence that happened beforehand. We're just focused on identifying the body fluid, doing the DNA. And I think that that's a good thing because you want your science to be objective. But it's also a benefit probably to our mental health because from the flip side of it, I just can't understand how an officer can deal with the trauma of victims all the time and not take some trauma home themselves,
I switched from DNA because of that. They wanted me to hire in and go into the biology section. I was like, I can't. You have diapers with semen in them, cases like that. And I want to have children. And I don't want to go home angry all the time. That little temper of mine, I don't want to go home angry, and I don't want to be an overprotective parent. So I went to drugs. Drugs, is it a drug or not a drug? A lot easier.
There's a dark world out there that fortunately people are not privy to. I've always told people that probably the only time you would really see it is if you sat a month on a grand jury. And I've met people who have done a month on a grand jury, and when they come out, their eyes are just open wider than they've ever seen. Because when you say something as simple as semen in a diaper, and you start to process that, yes, that's extremely disturbing because we all know what those things really are about.
I think that would work me over worse than the hair on the baseball bat. That's just the ball bat or the gun or the knife. It's bad and it resulted in someone's death likely. But the semen in the diaper or like you mentioned, Marci, the child that was beaten in Western Kentucky, people I don't know, they don't want to think of it. They don't think of it, or maybe it just makes you feel better to pretend it doesn't happen.
Yeah. All of the above, I think.
Yeah. And we sanitize things. People like if they get charged with rape first and then they plead and it comes down to sexual misconduct, and we've got all these. I've always said that those words I think, sanitize it for people. And I'm not suggesting people should go out and seek this stuff and get boned up on it because it's horrible. But it's an interesting perspective you all have. And two, the objectivity is important, is having to separate yourself from that and not let the emotion override you. Because I know when I was in the unit, one of the things that you had to really be on guard for, and sometimes we'd bring new people and you had to watch carefully, is when a kid was involved. Because I saw imaginations really start to click quicker than they should have been, and you have to check that or you'll make huge mistakes, because the emotional roller coaster that takes you on a ride for is incredible. But the same thing is like going in and watching an autopsy is, on the one hand, if you think about what's going on and you're paying attention, that's rough. But if you go in there like you all do, and the whole thing is a process to get to an answer and to get to the truth, that's how you handle it. Is that I think you have to structure yourself up. So that's an interesting perspective. And again, people that want to get in the field, this is the kind of thing to know, not to distract them from getting in the field, but these are the realities of it.
Now, is that evidence presented to you all, or have you all ever gone out and collected it yourself, as far as at the crime scene?
We don't typically respond to crime scenes, but there are times that we do. If there are multiple fatalities or it's just a really complex scene and law enforcement needs our help, yes, we will go. But we really screen them. We had one where KSP Post called and asked us to come, and they had told us that the body was removed. So we had a really squeamish analyst that, great note taker, can go in, can go help, but was not expecting the body to be there, and the body was still there. And law enforcement was not happy with us when we said, no, she was willing to come help and do whatever, but that was without a body. So I had to back up, but that was a very gruesome homicide. So I don't blame her either.
What was she there to do absent a body? What was her job to do there that day?
Basically, when we go in, we're going in and we're looking at the scene, and you're going to have people with hands on trying to figure out exactly what we're going to collect, what we're not, and what will be available. So just because there's evidence at a scene doesn't mean we're going to analyze it. We're going to analyze items from the scene that answer a question that matters. So if I have a bullet hole in me and there's blood on my shirt, whose blood is that? It's mine. Do we need to test it? No. Is there possibly that there was a fight and maybe somebody else is bleeding and there's blood in a different spot? Then maybe. So we have to consider what all that evidence is. So we generally will have what I call the note taker, somebody that's kind of putting around behind, that's, documenting what was there, why we chose something over something else, who collected what, that type of information.
Do you have regular conversations with investigators and law enforcement? Do you have like huddles and communications? Because to get to those things and prioritize those, you'd have to know enough about the case to make that call.
We do what we can to encourage them to call before. We have established what we call the case acceptance policy, where we limit, like on a homicide case, we're going to say, pick those 10 items that you think are going to help your investigation. Pick those first 10. If we don't get anything, then we'll move to the next 10. But a lot of times in the past, they used to just pick everything up, throw it in a box and say, you guys figure it out. That called for a lot of questions, with, okay, what is all this and where's it going? But now with the case acceptance, they're better at picking out what they think they need analyzed. They will sometimes call in advance and ask, hey, I've got all this. What's the best, what are my best 10? But we still get some where there's only 5 or 6 pieces of evidence, and, they're pretty clear on the case details. And then we also will have, sometimes we do it with our lab techs. Sometimes the analysts will do it, and they'll pick up the phone and call and ask more information. How is this blood smear? You find blood in the bathroom. Where do you go when you cut your hand? I go in my bathroom and go get a Band-Aid. So blood in a bathroom is not always, going to be related to a crime. So you just told me that you found blood in the bathroom. Tell me how you think it's related to the crime. They will call and ask that detail. Where was this Pepsi can found? We had a case in a university where someone was sexually assaulted, and they collected condoms from all over and stuck them all in one bag too. But it was, hey, which one of these was actually in the room?
Yeah, and that goes back to the fact that the DNA database is governed by the FBI, and they have a very specific set of rules that all labs have to follow to enter their evidence. And part of that is there has to be clearly documented connection to the crime. So if we just go around and collect all the cigarette butts from a parking lot, well, what's the likelihood that those are going to be related to this robbery? What makes you think that this cigarette butt is related? And it's usually because a witness saw them smoking in that area, or they have some surveillance footage. It usually comes back to something like that. But we have to document that in order to put the profile into CODIS and to search it.
And that's a good safeguard. And again, there's one of the things I think that people in the community sometimes are confused on is you'll hear people say, well, they've got your DNA. They're tracking all of our DNA. Well, in the United States, most of us, even in the law enforcement end or in the analytical world, would probably even argue, no, I don't want everybody in there. So that's a good thing to know, too, is that there's a threshold before your sample gets entered into that, because a lot of people think that the government's just the only people really getting all your information is Facebook. So that's it. It really, truly, the government actually, but that's a good threshold to know that people can take a little bit of comfort in, maybe.
So with your evidence, where do you all store that? Do you, like, if you're working on a knife, let's say, and you haven't finished today, do you all have like a specialized area that you store it? It's locked. What's that like?
Well, the entire laboratory is very secure. And so there's badge entry on every door so that a drug chemist wouldn't necessarily be able to enter the biology section and vice versa. And it's just part of the security. Likewise, we have, if I am working on, say, a knife, and I haven't finished it, I have a personal locker that I can lock, and only myself and my supervisor has a key to. I can put it in there overnight, and then I can pull it out the next day and finish what I need to do with it.
And that goes for all types of testing. Every analyst has a secured locker. Some of them don't even give their supervisor a key. If we need to get in, we have to break the lock. Doesn't happen very often, but it has happened. Just to keep, just so they can get on the stand and say nobody had access to that piece of evidence except myself.
Probably more so with drugs.
Mm-hmm. Is that what we call the chain of custody?
Yes.
Part of it? Exactly. I think we've talked about that before and how important that is, because once somebody gets a peek, once they kind of pull that back, the whole thing gets kind of tough at that. So that's good to know too.
We have a bar-coded system, and basically if piece of evidence comes into the lab, the evidence technicians are going to sign for it, document the date and time that it came in, who they received it from. They're going to get a signature from that person. Then they're going to put it in a storage location. They're going to transfer it to the section or to the analyst to sign. And then, again, that is a marked, scanned transaction in our management system. And then if I hand it off to Marci, it gets transferred in, we call it the BEAST. It's our laboratory information management system. It stands for Bar-Coded Evidence and Statistical Tracking, the BEAST. And it is a beast.
Is that where investigators go to get the results of the lab work?
It is. They have a different interface than we do, but they can go in there and download their reports and see the status of their case and everything.
Pretty cool.
I apologize.
Okay.
How are those assigned, these cases? How do we know if you get the knife or you get the knife? How's that determined what each piece is assigned to, whom it is assigned to?
It depends on the section. So in my section, we just try to work them in the order they came in. And so I'll be ready to extract again, and I'll go to the folder that has all the property crimes, because that's what I've been focusing on for the last few years. And I will take the oldest property crimes and I will organize them into an extraction set and take it on.
When I first started, I was hired through a grant for my drug chemist position. Ray Larson arranged for it. I was to work all Lexington cases. So in that situation, Lexington case would come in, David Flannery would come bring me evidence. And, I got them all. And some sections are still that way, whether it was grant-based or just, hey, I'm always going to do Owensboro cases or Bowling Green, or I get Ashland PD. We kind of, sometimes they'll break it out that way in sections. But it really does just depend on which section and which of the laboratories.
Does the lab keep the evidence after you've analyzed it? Do y'all store it, or does it go back to where it came from?
It goes back to where it came from. We do not have storage facilities. I don't have enough room for analysts right now, let alone storing everybody's evidence. So it goes back. There's some evidence, especially with DNA, that you cannot destroy before a trial. So we stick stickers all over it if we can that says, do not destroy this. You know, you need to look at this statute before you even think about it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Accidents happen, so maybe the stickers will prevent that from happening.
Yeah, they can't be storing that stuff, especially when they're getting bed frames and bread rolls in.
Exactly.
There's no room for that.
Car doors and car seats.
Oh, that's hilarious. Because I remember our forensics people on some of my cases cutting pieces out of a house, but I'm pretty sure we didn't send you the baseboards. I'm pretty sure.
Well, we've had floorboards, whole big pieces of plywood, safes. It's just entertaining sometimes to go in the evidence room and see what's there.
Too funny. How about the drug part? Because we've talked a little bit about DNA and everything, but how much of a drug do they have to send? For example, if I go to a house and I take out a marijuana grow in somebody's attic, and let's just say it's got 300 plants, do they bring 300 plants to Laura, or how do they do that?
We prefer not. Basically, your charge is going to be if it's over 5 plants, that's where it becomes a felony. So 300 is obviously over that. I would encourage them to bring 10 plants just to show that we had more than 5. Take pictures of the rest. If it's large, bundles of marijuana, you're really looking at 8 ounce, 5 pounds, and 10 pounds as your cutoffs. And even with, the heroin and the meth and whatnot now, you're looking at 2 gram and 4 gram cutoffs. So if you've got, 5 kilos, I'm going to test each one, but I don't need to necessarily test everything in every case. Once you reach that threshold, you've proven the charge.
Have there been changes in the types of drugs and the amounts of drugs, or how many times that you're asked to analyze drugs based on changing laws or people's changing attitudes on drugs? For example, marijuana, has that decreased or anything based on the changing tide?
There are some prosecutors that just don't bother with marijuana anymore. So a lot of those agencies have stopped submitting the marijuana. There are still a lot. We still get a lot of marijuana in. There's still a lot of trafficking that goes on. There are still a lot of people that think that, hemp's legal, so, I can have a bag of hemp in my purse. Well, no, plant material, even if it's hemp, is not legal.
Yeah.
You can't have the plant material itself unless you're the farmer or the processor. So we still get a lot of that. We have gotten a lot more of the different, the fentanyls, all the different synthetics are coming up. Methamphetamine is king in Kentucky. If you look at all the items that we tested last year, I believe 51% of those items were methamphetamine. All the other drugs combined made the other 49%.
Before I left, and I've been, just for the record, I've been gone probably a year and a half, is that I know that there had been a shift to the opioid problem, and a lot of effort was poured into that federally and locally, funding-wise and everything, which was great. But I know that we were pretty careful to talk to the people, the powers to be, to let them know that, hey, it's a different economy, and you can hit something pretty hard, and meth was what we were seeing in Lexington starting to creep back up again. Is that you hit it hard, they're going to go to another product. Well, I think the efforts on the opioid problem were justifiable. You got to be ready for that next thing, and it will probably be meth again. Probably be meth.
Yes.
Do you get a lot of tests based on overdose deaths and things like that, as far as like the tox part of it? How many of those do you think you get a year?
So we only do the antemortem, the pre-death, so those are going to be DUI or some other investigation. The toxicology for the medical examiner's office is actually a contract lab.
Gotcha.
So we don't see that, but we know the medical examiner in Frankfurt, their office is above us, and we see the number of overdose deaths that come through. There's a bunch.
And even on how specific can you get even on the DUI side? How far can you break that down in somebody's blood to identify different drugs?
It's pretty good. The hard part is when these new synthetics come out, they're new and you don't know how the body metabolizes them. You have to go through and do these validations. You got to figure out what the drug is. In the drug section, if you have a white powder, you can, keep analyzing that white powder and figure out what it is. When you are working with toxicology and drugs in the blood, if you're talking 1 or 2 nanograms, that's like taking a spoonful of sugar and sprinkling it on a football field and then getting it all back. So you're doing that search, and then you're trying to get enough to look at, and then you're trying to figure out, what it is. And so the toxicology part is mostly on the synthetic and the newer drugs is done by vendor labs because they've got the money and the resources to do the research. And it's kind of a competition to see which one can, hey, we do this many synthetics now, and, send your sample to us, and you got a better chance that we'll identify it. So we are slower on that because we don't have the money for that research. And it is possible, but even, you send something off, you can send it to one vendor and they'll have a panel of drugs they look for and they'll catch it, but the other vendor, they have 6 other things in there. It's kind of like a menu, and you may or may not hit it.
And it's always changed, and so it's, you're facing that. Well, let's move a little bit too. When we talk about the field of forensics and what you all do, you analyze this evidence, you make the reports and everything. Do you ever have to go to court?
Yes. So I would say it really comes in waves. I may not testify at all for 6 months, but then I might have 3 subpoenas in 1 week. I would say on average, and this is going to differ once again, based on the section you're in, because the people in drugs and toxicology, they go a lot more often. But for me, probably averages out to about once a month over my whole career. And just depends.
How about you, Laura?
When I was a drug chemist, part of it was probably because I was pregnant, and the jury's always sympathetic with the pregnant witness, and so defense doesn't go after you too hard. But I testified in a 4-day, it was Labor Day weekend, so it was only a 4-day week. I testified 16 times.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Good Lord, were you home at all? Or did you just
Not much.
stay at the courthouse?
And at one point, I was between, I think I had to go from Lincoln County, I had to go from Fayette Federal Court to Fayette Circuit Court. Then I had to go to, I want to say it was Lincoln County, but it could have been Harrodsburg. And when I was trying to get there, I got stuck behind on Country Road, got stuck behind a mobile home that got stuck under a tree, and they were having to cut it. So the judge called me.
You're
on
making
the phone.
Kentucky sound bad.
This was back in, it was either 1993 or 1995, because that's when my kids
In
were
Kentucky,
born.
when somebody says they're moving, they're moving.
Yes. But I had to end up testifying on the phone for Fayette County because I was going to be late when I was in, whether it was Lincoln or Boyle. Mercer. Whichever one, just because it was so back to back. But drug chemists do testify probably closer to once a week or 2 to 3 times a month. And then toxicologists, they tend to go to court a lot. They get subpoenaed a lot. And then they just sit there and watch everybody plead out. So it's a complete waste of their time. It bothers me when judges and prosecutors are complaining that it's taking us a while to get their cases out, and yet they have no problem making that person sit in court a day or 2 a week and never testify.
And so that happens to you all too.
Yes.
Yeah. Because 2 things I caught from all of that is that, one, I missed my shot. I should have had a maternity gown, and I've been left alone on the stand, that obviously. And then the other thing, too, is that that's another thing people don't understand from the outside, because TV never shows that, is sitting and waiting. And then sometimes the afterthought, we didn't need you. Well, a phone call would have been great. So you're not the only ones. Is that if I had $1 for every time that happened, it would have been amazing where, we didn't need you. Or another thing for us, I don't think it happened to you all, but some of the less than credible defense attorneys a lot of times would find a new officer just to share this with you all at a preliminary hearing and find them in the hall and go up and talk to them and everything. And then they'd come back and they'd say, hey, guess what? They don't need you. Go ahead and go home.
Oh.
And then the officer would leave. And then, of course, the judge would be paging them or calling them and everything. And it was just one of the shisty things to do back in the day. And, of course, those after that, if you were that attorney, nobody spoke to you in the hall after that. You were done and whatnot. But good times. So that's another thing, too, is so if people want to get in this field, that's something they need to be prepared for, is they're going to have to testify. Now, to testify in your field, and I knew we'd come back to this, What is there a process that when Marci or Laura comes and swears in and sits in there, is there a process that the court recognizes who you are and what you do and gives you credibility based on that? How's that look? How do you get to that point?
Well, yes. So they introduce us, they call us in, they have us give our name and where we work. But I don't think that Kentucky really moves to recognize the witness as an expert anymore. Not in most counties.
They do more on the chemistry side.
Okay.
Where you have to give, like she said, where you work, what your education is, where you got or what degree you have, and then what training you underwent at the lab or outside the lab. Then they basically will accept you as an expert or not.
I guess not formally. They don't say, well, I moved to enter this person as an expert. But the fact that you were allowed to continue testifying it's implied.
Yeah,
right?
There we go. And that's what I was getting at, is that there has to be some credentialing on that. And again, if you don't pass that, then I guess you don't get called or you don't get to stay on the stand or whatever. That's an interesting thing too. So we've got that we know we've got to testify. Have you ever had a bad experience in testimony, being cross-examined? Has anybody ever gotten like rough with you or anything? Or
has there been anyone who hasn't had a bad experience?
Yeah, not many. With drugs and talks, it's not as difficult. A lot of times you just get up, you give your credentials. They ask you if you've ever seen this, recognize this evidence. Have you ever seen it? You point out your lab number, initials. They ask you, what you did with the sample. You tell them what test you did, and you tell them what the conclusion is. Defense will get up, and their question is, did you know my defendant? Do you know anything about this defendant? Simple questions like that, and then they're down. So a lot of times you were, waiting for an hour and a half, get on the stand, and it's 15 minutes, and you're right back off. So it's not so bad. But
yeah, with violent crimes, so this is going to cover the DNA section, serology, firearms, and trace. Anybody who typically passes evidence around in those cases, it can be very adversarial. And it seems like the better or the less that they have, the more adversarial they can be. And it can be very stressful.
how do you approach that? What kind of mindset do you have, and especially after experience knowing that you're going to sit down and that's coming? What do you do? Again, people that they need to know if you're going to get in this field that this is there and it's the reality of the game. What are some of the things that you've done over the years to get maybe used to that or prepare for that or to handle that?
Well, first of all, in our training, we train people because you don't have to just present your evidence. You have to say it in a way that people who aren't scientists can understand. So we want to get them thinking about that and able to verbalize that way. So we set them up to know just court procedures. So that they know what they're getting into when they go into court. So we start there in training. Before a trial, hopefully you've talked to the prosecutor. I like to give them a list of questions to follow, which is just basically, what is DNA? What kind of testing do you do? And the build up to the actual results to give the jury a little bit of background. I also go through my report and my notes and I refresh my memory. And I think the biggest thing for me is because you can get so nervous is that I just have to remember that this is not about me. I'm not on trial. This is about going in there and presenting evidence, whether it be just being your best, whether it be for the victims in the courtroom or for the defendant who may have been wrongfully accused.
Good advice.
And I always, when I start getting that anxious feeling, it's like, just, calm down. You're just trying to explain to the jury and answer for the jury, what these questions are. They can, be trying to provoke something out of you, but you just, you stick to science. You stick to what you know. You do not extend into any area that you're not an expert in. If they asked me, as a drug chemist, if they asked me, hey, could you have gotten DNA off of these bags? I have no idea. I'm not a DNA analyst. You just don't reach into any other section of the laboratory. You answer only what you're allowed to do.
Stay in that swim lane then, right?
Yes.
For sure. And I guess that's a tactic, is to try to bait you out of that lane. They did it with us quite a bit too. Good stuff on that. So people need to be ready for the idea that they're going to have to go to court and testify. Let's talk more about, because I know we've got people listening. If somebody was interested in forensics, again, we'll start with Marci and then come over to Laura. What would you tell them to do, especially at a young age, to discern that, to kind of come to that, and then what kind of preparation can they make to move into the field?
Hey, you know there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, which is our website, and it has show notes for imagery and audio and video files related to the cases you're going to hear. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and YouTube, which has closed caption available for those that are hearing impaired. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you download your podcast from. Subscribe to the Murder Police podcast and set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.